All right, welcome everybody to day 5, our last, not the last stream, but the last day of our 2021 live stream extravaganza. Today, this episode, we are discussing virtual production and the future of Hollywood. And I'm really excited for this because I like learning new stuff, getting to talk with people who are experts in their field beyond the limited ability that I have. So this is going to be a lot of fun. We're joined by Brian Drews.
Drews.
Okay, thank you. Noah Kadner has Dulull.
Yeah, you got it.
Oh, perfect. And our own internal expert, Kelly Shipman. Thank you guys for joining us today. I'd like to start off, as I do, with, in case anybody doesn't know who you guys are, give a little background of who you are and what you do. We'll start with Brian, and then we'll go to Noah and Haz, and we'll work around that way. So Brian, start us off, who you are and what you do.
Thanks, Houston. Nice to be here, and thanks. Look forward to the conversation. I'm the founder of Zero VFX. I've been doing visual effects since college, and started the company in 2010. And I supervise and produce, and then just kind of run the show. So yeah, just excited for the conversation.
Yeah, nice. And Noah.
Hey, Noah Kadner. I am the virtual production editor at American Cinematographer magazine. So I get to talk to geniuses like Brian and Haz all day long and find out what they're doing. And I also host the virtual production podcast, and I wrote the virtual production field guide for Epic Games, the makers of Unreal. So yes, I'm a big fan of this stuff. I would put the exclamation point instead of the question mark after the future of Hollywood. That's me.
Cool. Asterisk. Cool. And Haz.
How do I follow up with Noah and Brian? Okay, I'll try. Hi, everyone. I'm Haz. Super excited to be here. I am a director and producer. My last 2 movies were on Netflix, science fiction movies called The Beyond and Origin Unknown. And I did a TV show for Disney called Fastlane, which is on Disney+. I'm currently, right now, deep in production of my 3rd feature film, which is a fully animated feature film called Rift, which is completed entirely inside Unreal Engine, scheduled for release probably mid-2022.
Cool. Awesome. So thank you guys for joining us. And of course, Kelly, who are you and what do you do?
Hi, I'm Kelly. I work with Puget Systems in the labs department. I specialize in all things 3D, whether that be content creation, rendering, game development, all that kind of stuff.
Thanks. Awesome. And like we did yesterday, I'm going to be taking a back seat and kind of running the show behind the scenes while I let the experts kind of handle their stuff. And I'll be taking questions from the audience and throwing links into the chat and that sort of thing. So since we've gotten introductions out of the way, I will be stepping away and I'll let Kelly kind of run the show. So we'll get right into it.
All right.
Thanks, Houston.
All right. So let's start off. I mean, virtual production, Unreal Engine, all that has been kind of the buzzword in the hot new thing in film for a long time. How quickly are studios actually adopting this and using it?
Noah, do you want to start with that one? Do you want to start with that one? And then
I mean, I think one thing, and this is interesting because I'm actually working on a glossary of terms for virtual production because it's so new that people are even trying to understand the term itself. But when we say virtual production, right now people think, oh, Mandalorian LED walls, that's virtual production. And it's actually this very wide continuum of any time that you are using digital or virtual or real-time tools to kind of enhance in some way live action production. So LED walls is definitely the kind of most flashy and kind of up-to-date stuff that we're doing with this, but it's really been around for decades if you think about it. So I mean, yeah, it is just becoming more and more visible now that it's flashy and interesting. But I don't know what Brian has his experience been with this, but it really is just bigger than ever.
Yeah. I think of virtual production as it's really, it is an umbrella term, kind of like mixed reality in a way, right? Where there's all sorts of stuff that sits underneath it. I would even consider things like volumetric acquisition, other pieces like that, where you're actually taking performances and able to transport them to a different time and place. That to me is sort of that's a way to kind of encapsulate, in my mind, what virtual production is. You're taking real performances or real environments, or even photoreal environments, but either way, you're sort of taking something and transporting it to a different world. And I think, to Noah's point, that's been going on for a long time. It's just that it's getting to a point where the LED wall technology really did expose a lot of this to the general public in a way that made it feel real tangible and less abstract. So it was like, oh my gosh, I understand this transporting thing now. You know what I mean? So I think that's really where, it's all about that definition. But I think that also what I'm seeing is the phone technology, right, has really pushed forward a lot of this technology and also investments. Let's be honest, our industry is big, but it's certainly not as big as mobile devices. And so as we're getting all these sensors and all of these different applications to support consumer, that starts moving its way into prosumer and then also into professional expectations. So it's all starting to jam together into one really cool kind of holistic sort of exploration, I'd say. So that's
No, definitely. And just to echo both Brian and Noah, like it really is an umbrella term. Like, like from my end, I come from production, from the filmmaker side. And you always get like financiers or executives or studio executives. Hey, can we do that Mandalorian thing? You're like, oh man, if one more person says Mandalorian, it's like what you guys say. It's not just Mandalorian. It's not just LED. For me, like, real time's been around a long time. I started my career in video games back in 97, 98, PlayStation 1 era. And, I remember my job was to create what you call FMV, full motion video, which is the game cinematics, right? And we were creating movies in a game engine. We were, hitting play. Everything was running in real time. We're using a controller, very rudimentary, low-res graphics. And now flash forward today, we have close to photorealistic graphics, 8K textures, displacement maps, and tons of geometry being thrown in. But the principles are still the same. Yeah, it's allowing a filmmaker to take the camera, move around in the virtual world, trigger off certain events and characters and motion and tell a story, and I think that is in a way of describing virtual production because it contains motion capture, it contains volumetric capture, it contains CG environments. Everything is synchronized to work in real time. And I think today we're in a point where you have amazing graphics cards like the RTX graphics cards from like NVIDIA. You have high-end workstations like Puget, and just tons of like the hardware is becoming affordable, but most importantly accessible. It's not just the industry. I remember the days, to do graphics, you needed silicon graphic workstations. There's purple indigo, and they cost like tens of thousands. Was now you can do it on a laptop and be able to get a good result. And I think all of that is part of what virtual production is.
Yeah.
Yeah. The who was it? The Academy of Arts and Science, Motion Picture Academy, just a couple days ago, put out a video about virtual production. And they kind of went through the history of in-camera VFX, like all the way back to like matte paintings from Charlie Chaplin movies, and just kind of it just shows how this is kind of an extension of that. It's really not like that unique, if you think about it.
Their projection forever, right?
Yeah,
exactly.
There's been other things. It's just kind of speeding it up.
Yeah,
I mean, I feel like at some point, virtual production will stop being like virtual production and it's just production. Like this is just kind of one of the other tools in the system, right?
Yeah. I remember back in the day, like so I worked in commercials for quite a while in the career as well. I still do now to some extent. And I remember when The Matrix came out, there was the request for, oh, hey, like, let's do a title treatment just like The Matrix, that thing, right? And that was the thing everybody asked for the whole time. And I feel like The Mandalorian before and after really sort of like had that similar phenomenon, even though it's not like a title treatment, it's a methodology.
Yeah.
And so I think whenever a client approaches and says, hey, we really want to do this virtual production, I say, let's take a step back from methodology. And let's talk about creatively what it is do we want to achieve and what kind of interaction do we, and really starting to kind of get down into understanding why the LED, like why do you think you need the virtual production? What sort of problems are you trying to solve? What kind of cool things, like if you have a problem, I might have different, and we might have different sort of solutions that aren't, that we could call virtual production, but maybe are different than what you saw in The Mandalorian before and after. So I think it is, again, it's sort of going to that definitional, but it's also about us sort of as an industry starting to kind of guide the way towards the application that makes sense for the moment and for the project, because it's super technical, it's super complicated, like sometimes production just isn't ready to go into a volume because, you know, we don't have enough time to prep it, or X, Y, or Z. There's all sorts of different sort of things that go along with it, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But if you just sort of listen to the, like, let's do it this way, without talking about like what the goals are, that's kind of where I think that can kind of go off the rails a little bit. So yeah,
and absolutely. Like, you know, I used to be a VFX supervisor, and then when I transitioned to becoming a director, I remember having conversations with people like yourself, Brian, you know, like VFX supervisors, VFX producers. And it's interesting because, like, you know, I get really excited. Like I shot a virtual production LED wall project last year, and it was my first LED wall, and I kind of fell into it really easy because of my background in visual effects and video games. But I remember the awkward conversation I had was with the financiers. They're like, why do we have to spend this amount of money up front? Because they're so traditional. They're so used to, like, okay, we get a bit of money for prep. We get the money for the talent, the top line talent. And then, you know, the visual effects, we'll figure out the tax credits later on. We'll do some of it in Montreal, some of it in wherever that we get the best tax. But they can't think like that when it comes to virtual production. You got to do all of your cost of the visual effects, and all of the CG has to be final pixels signed off. So what I found was a bit of a paradigm shift in terms of production, was the conversations I'm having as a director. I got to make my decisions like right away. I can't be like, oh, you know, I've got time to think about it in visual effects. You know, we can replace everything later on. You kind of have to get away from that. But also, executives at the studio and the directors both have to make a decision together on the spot, and so that the cost of going and make those CG environments, you know, are well spent. And then the other thing that I realize is how many days are we going to spend in the volume? You know, if it's for like, you know, a few shots, then it's not worth it shooting just a few shots. You know, for me, you got to have at least 65 to 70% of your movie is in the volume for it to amortize across the production budget to make sense, so that your producer isn't like, really, we could have shot it on green screen. We could have shot some like second unit plates. You know, the camera isn't doing anything crazy. You know, and I think that's the conversation. You're absolutely right, Brian. You know, a lot of that, you need to have these conversations like, do we need to do it this way? And what is the reason of doing it this way? Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of reasons on my end. Like, we wanted to use a big name talent and she wouldn't leave where she is. She wanted to stay in LA. So like, okay, so we just reach out to an LED wall company in LA, we shoot them there, it's fine. But for other reasons, because creatively you think it's going to be cool, you want it to look like the Mandalorian, which it won't, because it's a style thing. And I think there's a level of education. And I think, like, Noah, when you know what you released, your PDF, you know, the Unreal Engine guide for virtual production. Now I read that, which was amazing, by the way.
Thank you.
Like, it's things like that I think when producers are looking to break down a budget, or even entertaining of having a conversation with a visual effects house like you guys, Brian, is maybe to have some education of just looking at what it is. What is the terminology? You know, when you say virtual production, what does that mean? And then having that before they go and have a conversation with an effects house or virtual production supervisor.
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look back in the history of filmmaking, this sort of thing has happened before, where there's kind of a shiny new technology that has some kind of watershed moment. Like, if you go back to the 90s, you know, when Jurassic Park first hit, everybody was like, oh my God, they can do CG dinosaurs. It doesn't look like, you know, kind of like janky stop motion anymore, or some kind of weird, you know, giant puppet. And so then there were a lot of movies in the 90s that had CG in them that looked really, really bad, because suddenly every filmmaker was like, CG is the answer to my problem. I have a crappy idea for a story, but let's just throw CG at it and it's going to be amazing. And people are going to see it and I'm going to get Jurassic Park money. So, you know, I think in some ways Mandalorian may be that sort of gateway to another era where suddenly everything is going to be shot on LED walls, and probably, as Has says, a lot of stuff that has no business being shot on LED walls. So, the antidote to that is really to study this stuff, understand what it's capable of, and then really start from the beginning and make it work as that kind of production. It's not something you just want to bolt onto something that was already going to be a completely conventional sort of shoot. It really, in this project that I'm working on to develop terminology for virtual production, we're even talking about adding a fourth phase of production, kind of pre-production, to really capture the idea that there's so much more work that's required to make these things really shine before you shoot, that people are so used to deferring to post-production, where it's like, oh, I'll just grab something on a green screen stage and, you know, the VFX folks will make it work somehow in post and I'll be fine. It's actually no. It's like that activity happens before you shoot now.
Yeah.
And getting producers to understand that, and getting the whole crew's head around that the post-production period is going to be much shorter as a result and cheaper, is a lot of work. And that's really, if you can kind of embrace that, that's really the strength to lean into, and not just, whatever the question is, your answer is LED wall. That would be a mistake, I think.
Yeah, for sure. And because it is a seismic difference, because you're going from a fix it in post mentality, right? Which is something that, like, we've got great tools, we've got great artists, we've pulled it off like every single time, right? Yes, you can fix that in post for sure. And you still can. But if you're spending all of your VFX budget, up front, you really want to fix it in prep, because it is that mentality shift from fix it in post to fix it in prep. And that's just, that's months and months and months different, and just mind space different, right? So it's
absolutely.
Really,
Also, the whole
bigger hurdle than the technology, I would guess.
Yeah.
In a lot of respects, because it needs everybody to kind of you need a big tent, and that tent needs to all agree that decisions are made early, right? So that's tough. That's tough.
Yeah, absolutely. The other thing is the execution thing. I remember, like, when we first shot the LED wall project last year, people just assume you just stand in front of the screen and you've got your shot, and they don't realize the thing that makes the LED walls work so well is a combination of good art department. Yep. You need, it's a balance between having foreground. We shot a virtual forest, so we built all these like forest props in front, and we had an LED wall above with simulating what moonlight was. But you still need traditional filmmakers craft on set. You still need good art directors, and you still need good gaffers. And I remember, like, a lot of the traditional filmmakers, the film crews were a bit worried. They're like, "Oh, are we out of a job?" Yeah. I'm like, well, no. I mean, look, when the green screen revolution came out, you still need people to light that green screen to look good. You still need props to make everything seamlessly fit. And I think there's a level of upskilling that a lot of the traditional crew should be aware of. We had our gaffer spend time with the Digital Village or the Unreal Engine Artist Digital Village as they were lighting, and it was giving good tips that, hey, you could get a bounce light here, we could put a fill light over here, and all of a sudden he's being involved. And this is usually, the gaffers are usually the guys that just light it, and then they just stand and wait, get their stuff done, and then they come on. Now they have an interaction with the digital department. So I think there's the pro thing that I found about the whole virtual production experience, or like from what I've seen as a filmmaker, is that there was much more collaboration involved, because there's so much work that has to be done in prep, in front of the screen. One of the things we did like a level of tech viz, because that's the other thing also, and I'm sure you guys will confirm, but the fact that when you hire a volume stage, you also need to have prep days, a tech recce, right? You can't just turn up and put your Unreal Engine scene and voila, off we go. Everything's got to be gen locked and all of that stuff. And so I remember, like, doing my shot list, because you do your shot list as a director, and my shot list changes instantly the minute you do your tech recce. But the thing about the tech recce is, I don't want to spend 5 days in a volume just doing tech recce. I mean, that stuff's expensive. Regardless, it's expensive, especially now. So what we did was we got the measurement of the stage. And we got, because every stage has got floor plans, right? You get them to send the floor plan, you bring your DP of what lenses you're going to use, and I think it was Cinema 4D or Maya, one of those 3D apps. We blocked out the stage, and we played footage on a plane in a moving media texture on the card, and we simulated it, and that was our tech viz. And then when we went on the day to shoot it, there was no nasty surprises. The thing that we were thinking is, how much foreground should we put in front for it to blend well? And again, that's the kind of thing that I think filmmakers need to be aware of. Like creatives have to think about it. Not like, oh, we just turn up an LED wall and it's all going to work. The other thing is that first ADs, they need to understand when they're doing their time boards that you would have to restart the machine at some point. It's going to clog up. Your video RAM needs to be refreshed, and things are going to crash. Things are not going to track well. And so you got to put in time for reboots. And yes, it may take 10 minutes or 5 minutes to reboot, but 10 minutes is not a luxury we have on set, right? So there's a lot of education that is required, because there's a lot of like, oh my God, this is amazing. This is Mandalorian. This is great. But I think people need to understand the obstacles, and like with every level of filmmaking, whether it's green screen or non-visual effects, it's problem solving. And virtual production brings another set of problems that you have to solve.
Yep. and they are a lot of interlocking, sort of overlapping problems at times, right? Where there's a lot of different sort of parallel technologies that all have to communicate nicely. So if something's not communicating in real time while the pressure is, while while everyone's staring at the back of your head, trying to figure out which part of that is the spanner in the works, that certainly happens, right? It certainly is. It's always a moment, right?
Particles was the big one. Like, we had particles in the background moving because I thought it would be cool to have some embers in the background, but then when you're moving the camera and it's trying to track things and it's getting confused, well, what am I tracking? And you realize, oh, we should just turn off the particles, or things like I did the rookie thing, where just pick up the camera and just shot the screen. And I'm like, why am I filming the screen? We have the CG environment. You can render the CG environment out. Don't just shoot the screen. You should be shooting a 50% 50% real, 50% screen. And it's a level of training, because you just instantly pick the camera and just shoot the screen, because you're like, well, I'm here. I may as well get a shot of the full enviirment. You're like, no.
Get your clean plate. Get your clean plate.
Clean plate. Exactly.
Yeah, and I think some of this is kind of the victim of its own success, as far as the way it's presented as this incredible new technology. But it's funny, I was actually interviewing one of the assistant directors of The Mandalorian a couple of weeks ago, and she said they actually have a really funny Star Wars themed error screen that they throw up whenever the volume has a major problem, and she just instantly calls, like, okay, everybody, that's going to be 10 minutes or maybe an hour. We'll be right back. So everybody just knows, like, oh, break time, when they see that graphic, because it happens. I mean, it's a big, complicated system. A lot of it is extremely bespoke, and stuff is being asked to do things and connect to things that it was never designed for, especially the screens themselves. Those are built for architectural usage. Those are built for jumbotrons at stadiums and for concerts. I mean, the last thing they were intended to be used for is to be filmed as reality for movies.
Right.
Now the manufacturers are kind of starting to catch on to what wants to be done, and I think you'll see some products that are a little more purpose built. But I mean, this stuff has a tendency to be operated really like a space mission in terms of its complexity, and it requires the crew, the manpower, the person power to make all that work, and it doesn't always work.
And the philosophical buy-in that if you do have to wait an hour, everyone knows that that's kind of one of the things going in, that may happen, and that's part of the cost of entry.
Yeah.
Let me get to a question from YouTube from Ones and Twos. Thank you for doing this. I just started online classes for virtual production. What entry-level skills would you recommend focusing on for someone wanting to enter the virtual production field? It's kind of a big field. What would you guys think?
It depends what you want to do in virtual production, right?
Yeah, that's very broad. It's like if you want to be an animator, if you want to be a filmmaker, if you want to be somebody operating a volume, if you want to be somebody doing mocap. I mean, I would say if you're just starting at home right now, it absolutely cannot hurt to learn Unreal Engine. Like the skills, that's a skill that is really cutting across a lot of this stuff. You could go on to make video games of that. You could go on to make shows like Mandalorian or any of the other. I mean, Star Trek Discovery just wrapped a season that shot the heck out of one of these LED walls. So that would definitely be something. And yeah, I mean, all of the stuff my job is really to interview filmmakers and kind of understand what they're doing, kind of report back and kind of look at workflows. But everything that I've learned in addition to that is really just looking at stuff on YouTube, reading through manuals, looking through tutorials, and just playing with this stuff. I mean, the cool thing is a lot of this is readily available. That they made Unreal Engine not basically, but completely free to download and play with and use professionally is pretty stunning. I mean, that's a tool that with just that you could make anything you could imagine if you put the time into it. So I think it's a great time to get into it. It's just willing to put in that kind of personal investment to understanding how these tools work and doing something cool with them.
Yeah, definitely. There's so much knowledge out there. Like, I learned Unreal Engine literally watching YouTube videos. Like, for me, I got into Unreal Engine in middle of 2019 because I was doing previs, prepping for the third live action feature, which obviously got postponed due to unfortunate COVID. But the best thing I did was download Unreal, installed it, and I installed it on a Mac laptop, by the way. Now I'm on a full-on PC, but like this is like, you know, because I was like, I'm a director, I don't need to, you know, once I left visual effects, I didn't look back at using Shake or Nuke or After Effects. I was like, hey, I'm just gonna focus, you know, let the guys do it. But you know, when you have time, you're like, I want to do some previs. And what I did was, the way I learned it, because it can be overwhelming, right? You go onto the Unreal, the amazing Unreal educational material, and there's like a lot to learn. You know, do I learn blueprints? Do I learn this? Do I learn that? Do I learn lighting? And for me, I'm like, well, you got to ask yourself, what is it you want to achieve with Unreal Engine, right? So for me as a director, I want to know, how can I bring some assets in? How can I move the camera? How can I adjust the lens? How can I do depth of field? And how can I just render out a bunch of sequence of EXRs or QuickTime and bring it into an edit? Right, those are my cheat lists, my list, and yeah, every night I'll go through it, and you know, I think it was within like a weekend I'd put together a quick sequence, very rudimentary. But my point is, I'd never touched Unreal, and all of a sudden I had a 30-second to 60-second sequence, and I'm like, oh, okay. So now I want to know how to bring particles. Now I want to know, you know, how to get better lighting, and then you just gradually build it in. And there's just so much material online. There's people like Matt Workman. You know, he was the first guy I looked at. I'm just going to follow this guy. Yep. And that is tons of people out there that's just doing amazing tutorials. And I think that's another element that I feel with virtual production brings, is that community. You know, when I broke into visual effects, it was extremely hard to break into visual effects. There wasn't training facilities back in like early 2000. You know, it was like you start off as a runner or a junior compositor, or, you know, in my case, as a roto artist, and I kind of worked up through compositing. But now, you know, there's just so much. You just literally need to ask yourself, what is it you want to do? You know, do you want to make a short animated film? Do you want to do, you know, live compositing using composure in Unreal? Just ask what you want to do, and then figure it out by just, because there's so much stuff out there. The community is huge.
For sure. Yesterday we had on a bunch of motion capture specialists. We had Gabriella's in chat, Feeding Wolves.
Yay.
She's working with Haz and some other YouTubers, and they're all like putting out amazing tutorials on doing motion capture for Unreal, using either bodysuits or cameras or whatever. So yeah, there's definitely a lot of tutorials out there.
Yeah, and just to kind of put a fine point on it, you know, when I jump on LinkedIn, I literally every other post I see is like, do you know any Unreal specialists or generalists, or just people that have who know even what Unreal is? Because I need them.
Yep.
I mean, it's almost like this explosion has happened, and it's slowly kind of proliferating out in the universe, and it needs people to, you know, be a part of it, which is to say, the demand has greatly outpaced the supply, because most of the people up until a few years ago who knew anything about Unreal were doing video games, which is, you know, obviously a kind of parallel but different set of disciplines to filmmaking. You have a lot of people who are incredibly well trained in more traditional 3D animation packages, like, you know, your Maya, your 3D Studio, that can definitely be retrained into Unreal Engine. But there's just kind of that moment where, you know, there's a huge gap, and I think a big opportunity for people who are maybe just getting started to jump into this, versus, you know, needing to build up those years and years of kind of working their way up the ladder. So, you know, now is absolutely a great time to get into this. And I think it will be that way. I think you'll see, you know, in the next couple of years, like I one of the articles I wrote recently was all about the different construction of LED wall stages around the world. And it quickly went, I mean, in the space of 2 years, it went from, oh, there's about 10, you know, that we know of that are in various stages of construction, to now there's well over 100. And, you know, I think that's going to double again in the next year. And, you know, every one of those places needs to have a full-time crew of people who know how to do this stuff. So yeah, it's just an incredible. And another thing that's cool that I think, you know, you guys probably have experienced as well, and kind of a silver lining to the pandemic, is that the opportunities to be part of those productions is no longer really geographically based in any way. People who are operating these screens may very well be sitting 10 feet away from them in the studio, or they could be halfway across the world on a VPN, dialing in and literally doing the same job, and nobody cares, because it's like they're the best person for it, or, you know, they wanted to have this person work on it, and they're just working on it. I mean, those barriers are just completely gone right now. It's just anywhere you might be in the world, if you have some talent and some, you know, ability to get yourself out there, it's possible to do it. So it's great.
That's pretty much how I was able to do motion capture on my movie. You know, like Gabriella is based in Florida, I'm based in London. Like 4 p.m. I would log in, Zoom screen, she would share her XN's live view, sometimes she'll share Unreal, and I would direct it. And it was like literally no different than being on the set, except on set, you know, you got craft services. We just made our own craft services. But the thing is that I was able to direct her, come up with as many versions of the performance we needed. You know, you still do your traditional shot list, send that to her way in advance, and then the next following, you know, day in the morning, I would wake up and boom, in the Microsoft Dropbox, you know, there is like all of the mocap, and I'll just drag and drop, retarget, and I'm like, oh my god, we're making a movie virtually. Like, you know, she's my virtual production supervisor, mocap performer, and it completely changed the way I approached making films. And then, you know, and then soon after, I put a post out looking for more Unreal Engine art, because I realized I don't need to settle with people that are in London. I can just choose the best person I think is right for the job. And Gabriella was perfect for this job. And then we end up hiring someone called Mark Cheng and Alex Kong in Montreal. And all those people, like, I was following, I'm like, I would just follow their work. Goes, oh, it'd be cool to work with them, but they're not available, or they're based in the US. And I'm like, no, they can come work on this. Yeah, even like international wire transfers, all super simple these days. And you're right, you know, it feels like the virtual production is also part of the fact that it's non-geographical. Virtual means that you literally could have a studio. You know, my entire company is run using Perforce. And every morning I go synchronize, boom, I can see what everyone's doing. We can log in and out of assets. We can source control. And again, you build a sense of community, but at the same time, you're focused on making good work. You're not focused about all this bottleneck of like someone being across the world or time difference. You just make it work because the technology is there.
Yeah, and you know, the studios used to be a big kind of roadblock to this because they really had major IP concerns, and so, you know, and maybe this is something Brian has observed, but you know, a visual effects house used to be very much like a roof over which people come into an office, they're on a render farm, they're on a local server, and nothing kind of comes in and out other than like plates or finished shots. No one would ever be, I mean, they might have a few people remotely dialing, but the vast majority of folks would be clustered around, you know, in offices doing work. And now, you know, the systems work. I mean, I talked to some visual effects supervisors about a year and a half ago, and they were like, I hate to say it because the situation with the pandemic is terrible. However, that being said, it's allowed me to rearrange my facility in the way I've been dying to do for years, and no one would ever let me because they would say, oh, no, we don't want IP to go out, like everybody under the one roof, like it's too important for security, forget it. And now it's like, finally, I get to do it the way I want it. So, I mean, there has just been that decentralization.
Yeah, I've been, you know, like security and content security has always been a thing. And we very early started cloud rendering using, and developed Zinc, which then got sold to Google. But even back then, just the idea of, you know, cloud-based rendering was like a very scary thing for some of the studios, right? So it you know, I think as people have become more familiar with the security involved with just general, you know, internet and HIPAA kind of, you know, like everyone's comfortable or fairly comfortable with data in the cloud, especially if it's done properly, and you do have the logging and the source control. You know, these things are, you know, it's almost more secure if everyone's dialing into a central point than not. And so we found definitely the remote, or I don't even want to say remote, but distributed work model is really great for a lot of reasons. It allows a little bit more flexibility in people's lives. You can work again with the best people that you know wherever they are. And strangely enough, though, tax incentives start becoming like a reverse. You know, they become a problem because those people are now not under, you know, if they don't live in the province or the state where you're based, then all of a sudden you may not be hitting the tax incentive things that the studios want. So if it's not security, it'll be tax incentives, right? But either way, I think at the end of the day, the thing that needs to get figured out is mentorship in a distributed model. Kind of going to the question that the YouTube viewer asked is, how do I learn what I want to do? If I don't know what I want to do, normally, you know, like people coming up into the industry would kind of learn from osmosis through those shoulder to shoulder moments. And the question is, if you sort of distilled stuff into task-based world for somebody who is starting as a generalist, how do they explore sort of those things that maybe aren't their direct task, but sort of nearby or parallel ones, which maybe they didn't even know existed, and which are way more exciting to them, but they just didn't know because they didn't know it existed until they saw somebody down the hallway doing something really cool and walked by it, right? So that's the thing that we're trying to figure out now is the mentorship model for that. It's really tough. But either way, for virtual production and just production in general, I think a task-based distributed is certainly music to a lot of people's ears for sure. Yeah,
for sure. So I want to get to this comment. Where'd it go? Okay, from Kentucky Ranger on YouTube. It's funny yet really awesome that many newer movies using this tech are based on video games. Probably extrapolate that out to just sci-fi. Are there plans on just making a non-video game movie? I mean, I assume that's probably a somewhat of a misconception that this is just sci-fi based stuff using virtual production and stuff. But what do you see for non-sci-fi movies using this tech?
Yeah, it's everything. I mean, go ahead.
No, I think you're going to say what I'm going to say, so you go for it.
Oh yeah, yeah. I mean, this year, let's see. I've talked to who have I talked to? The Muppets Haunted Mansion was completely shot in an LED volume. That's out on Disney Plus right now. And I mean, that's kind of genre, I guess. It's like more of like horror puppets, but I mean, you know, that's definitely not hardcore sci-fi. Let's see what else. There's a movie coming out on Netflix next month called Red Notice, the little tiny movie with like The Rock and Ryan Reynolds that actually did a bunch of, you know, it's interesting. That was originally planned to be a completely, mostly on location shoot. You know, it's like an international jewel heist movie. And, you know, due to needing to reconfigure things for COVID, they did a fair amount of stuff on LED walls, not a ton, but, you know, some key scenes that would have been big location scenes. And that's, you know, that's not sci-fi at all. I mean, it really, and I think, you know, even weird stuff like, not weird stuff, but stuff you would never even expect. Like there's a show on ABC called, I want to say it's called Station 19 or something. It's about like firefighters in Chicago or Seattle or something like that. And it's, you know, there's a ton of scenes where people are just having like soap opera drama inside a fire truck as they're driving to or from an emergency. And all of that used to be on location where they would bolt cameras to the side of real vehicles and just drive down the street. And and now they are doing a lot of that just on LED stages, just because why not? So that's the thing. I think a lot of this tech is so invisible to the naked eye, in the sense that if you're not aware of how it's being used, you might not even realize that you're seeing it, just because it just looks so believable. So, you know, I mean, there's a lot of video game adaptations out there in general these days because people love them. But at the same time, it's this tech is just kind of creeping into a lot of different genres, and you'd kind of be surprised how much it is and how much it will be, just because there are so many facilities coming online that can do it now.
Yeah,
that's the point, though.
I just finished it. Oh, sorry. Go on, Haz.
No, I was going to say, I mean, just to echo what Noah said, like, that's the point. You know, you're supposed to watch something and not pick out, oh, that's LED wall, or it's the same thing with visual effects, right? You know, when you do a visual effects shot, you know, the best visual effects shots I see are in the non-sci-fi genre movies, are the ones that are like drama, and you watch it and then you watch it behind the scenes, you're like, oh my God, that was green screen. That was so well comped. I think it was a Vampire on a Plane movie, some German production I remember watching last month. And like, I just assumed like, you know, they shot at an airport, you know, because I'm like, it'd be easier. But no, a lot of that was like green screen, really good set extension, visual effects. You know, there was no LED wall there. You know, I assumed there was the LED wall because it was really well lit. But when I saw the behind the scenes, it was green screen. I'm like, wow, the lighters and compositors are like rock stars. And that's the point. You're not supposed, if you do it well and you use it well, like with anything, the audience shouldn't be distracted by that. They should be just so immersed in the story and the characters.
Yep. And the inverse of that is something we just experienced. Is we were just finished a movie where the backdrop, you know, a printed backdrop, really did not hold up very well. So we just ended up rotoing and replacing that background, right? So, you know, even tried and true things fail at times, right? and visual effects might be needed to fix those sort of more, tangible, like non-esoteric, very clear old school stuff. Me personally, I would love to see printed backdrops be replaced with, just those things where it's like, oh, hey, you're on a sitcom stage and you open a door, you want to see the outside, like to have a printed backdrop there really feels like antiquated at this point, especially with the, like in a benign situation like that. LEDs really should be a thing that's in place for that stuff pretty much, like, because that will save people money in the long run for sure. Because those, you'd be surprised how expensive those printed backdrops are as well. So even just really benign stuff like that, that's not going to make, it's not going to make American cinematographer probably, but it's still a really
Hey,
good
you never know.
that is really annoying. It's like I can't tell you how many sequences we've shot where it's just blue screen and you're comping this exterior environment, and it's really hard to do well. And if you could get an LED in there, that's for sure the way to go.
And you don't need a big LED wall as well. Like, there's like some scenarios I've seen where you're in a room and you want the windows. And the cool thing about, right, you just need a small screen, because obviously the bigger your screen, the more real estate you have in your volume catcher, the more expensive it's going to be, right? Is typical stage cost. But like if you've got a built set and you get a really good monitor, that has the fidelity in the detail in terms of the pixels, you can just have that by the window, synchronize it. So, because the whole idea of LED wall is that it synchronizes your camera. So, you get the parallax, right? Not just the great lighting. But if you're smart about that, for television sitcom shows, you shouldn't have to use painted backdrops or blue screen when there's hair all over the place. So yes, I think a lot of that is once people understand, the tech a bit from a production point of view, as opposed to the technical side, they'll start to understand, how to use it well, I think, and be thinking outside the box.
Yeah, on the stream that the Motion Picture Academy did the other day about virtual production, one of their people talked about how they wanted to do a shoot like on site at some like famous location, but they can only get like the ability to film there for one day. Like that's all they had. So instead, they spent that one day getting some like establishing shots and 3D photo scanned the entire area, so they can then take that back to an LED volume and redo, and then have more shots, control lighting, and all that kind of stuff. Even though it's a modern, realistic thing, they'll do it on a volume because they can't get the real place for that long.
Yeah, that's actually where we spent a lot of our time during, I would say, like from mid last year on, was really focusing on LiDAR scanning and photo scanning, and really setting up a pipe for that through our facility. So we've started really, really focusing and really looking at that as our sort of focus in, knowing what we do well, what our team does really well, which is like making photoreal environment assets, really sort of focusing on, okay, great, let's go to a place and actually scan these locations, really, really get good at bringing those back. And then that's an asset that's either ported, can go to Unreal, or it can go to Maya, it can go to both, it can, so long as you have that dope data set from a location, that's really the building blocks that you need. So it's like, I think that's another piece where you're going to see a lot of innovation for set acquisition.
Yeah, just to kind of piggyback on that, I heard another funny story again from Mandalorian, this is a great example where it's like, it's so ubiquitous just because it was the first and did so much stuff. But talking about art department, and we have this term now, the VAD, the virtual art department, which is basically just the art department, but is much more involved directly in creating, camera usable digital assets. And so when you look at the Mandalorian, it's interesting. Now I'm to the point where I can't unsee it, but it's like, if you watch any scene in that show, you're going to notice that in the foreground where the actors are, there's always just a pile of junk. And as it gets further back into the background, there's always just more of it. And it's always kind of clustered around at a certain point. And that's where the screen starts. They always do that. And so, but because, when you're filming a show, you start from one angle and then you do an over the shoulder, maybe you flip around. And so what happens often on that show is a prop that began as a real physical prop ultimately then ends up at the background of a shot and now needs to be on the wall as a digital prop. And so they're getting into situations where they start with a real prop then they scan it and it ends up on the wall. And then, while they're working on the wall, somebody's like, oh, wouldn't it be cool if it looked like this? And, they change it around. And then they're like, oh, now we need it to be physical again. So they literally go back and 3D print the new version of what was started as a completely physical prop, got altered as a digital prop, and now needs to match the digital prop. So it's like this crazy continuum of just fluidity between what is a virtual prop and what is a physical prop, just because they can so quickly be one or the other based on the needs of filmmaking. So just getting your head around that asset creation and capture, and that there's things can go back and forth, to me is kind of fascinating. So I mean that's new, obviously.
Continuity. I think the script supervisor is going to have a new level of continuity to look out for now. And not only are they looking out for things that are moving around when you're doing like a reverse, but also, when you reverse that background as well, is it going to make sense? And yeah, we had a similar thing when we did Percival, the thing last year. For us, we didn't go to the extreme of scanning the props. But the thing is, for us, like we built the forest digitally, and then the art department went and found some trees and rented some tree trunks, because you can rent these things, and it just wouldn't match perfectly. And obviously I'm like, well, is anyone going to notice it? We're going to out of focus it. But the digital artists are so cool. They just went onto the marketplace, found a similar looking tree, adjusted it. And this was on the set, by the way. This wasn't like in a studio. This is on the set. And boom, we had it matched. And I think there's a lot of backwards and forwards. And again, that's a collaboration between art department and the Unreal Engine artists. And usually Unreal Engine artists very rarely get to talk to anyone on the set. Traditionally it's the VFX supervisors, right? Or your leads. But now all of a sudden, like the Unreal Engine team are talking to the prop designers, and they're like backwards and forwards. And the gaffers talking to the lighting artists, and the cinematographers talking to the virtual production supervisor. And this is like big mold of conversation going on. And I'm just looking, I go, wow. There's like the ego thing kind of goes out the window all of a sudden, because everyone's like, they're all in the same roof. They've got the same mission, which is how do we make that final frame look good and right? And I think that's beautiful. I think it's great.
So I have a question that I've been wondering about with all the specifically LED walls, but also on situations where LED volumes maybe not done, like some of the stuff that Has you're doing. How much of what is on that wall or taking place at filming is final pixels versus being touched up later? Or because I've heard that on The Mandalorian, a lot of their stuff that they filmed, they actually ended up rotoing out and then re-rendering something else. Do you know a sense of how often that is, or is that normal, or what?
I think for a big show like Mandalorian, because it's Disney, and I shot a show for Disney, so I can speak freely. But they have contingencies for that. I think for medium or to independent filmmakers, you gotta get your final pixels. But on our case, we still had a visual effects supervisor on set. When we did the thing at Rebellion, I remember I think the line producer was like, do we need a visual effects supervisor? I thought the idea is there's no post. I'm like, don't ever say there's no post. There's always going to be a level of post, okay? Right down to color grading, sound mix, that's all post. But we still had a VFX supervisor, and I'm so glad we did, because the VFX supervisor still did the measurements, took the lens distortion charts and all of that stuff. Because later on, we had these elements where we had fireflies in the forest in the back. And obviously, you're looking at the screen, you're like, pretty sure you kind of need 1 or 2 fireflies in front as well, just even out of focus, just to help feel like it's immersed. And we had the tracking, we had moving cameras, so luckily we had tracking data. So you will always have an element of post to be done. And I always advise all producers, even if you're being told so many times that the post is going to be minimal, still budget for some time and money for post, because you just don't know what can happen on a day. You may run out of time. I mean, this happens even without LED walls, whether you're shooting exterior, interior, things happen on a day. That's what that contingency is for. So yeah, you're always going to end up touching stuff up in post. I think you'll always, especially the power compositing in a way.
Agreed.
Yeah, but one interesting thing I've heard, again, going back to LED walls, is that what ends up being done in post on these big shows is less complicated stuff. Like if you start with a green screen shot, then you need to get somebody who's really amazing in post-production that can just, do incredible 3D animation, do incredible tracking. Whereas if you get kind of a botched, but mostly like 90% of the way they're shot on an LED wall, that could be a much less expensive person that's just coming in and doing some simple 2D fixes. They might even be able to pull it off like in something like Resolve, where they're just, doing, some color grading to address something, or, a blur to kind of fix something that just didn't quite look right. So, knowing that you got it a lot closer to begin with does potentially make the post side less expensive and less complicated. So, it has its pluses for sure.
Yeah, a lot of the challenges, a lot of the harder stuff that you might find yourself with VFX doing is trying to resolve two different worlds, right? And sort of saying, okay, we need to take this world, fit it into this world, and then have it look like a good comp, or like something naturalistic. But you might have two different elements from here and here that were shot at different times that just don't marry very well, and that's really where that's where it gets real tough, and it's elbow grease. It's lots of versions. It's just subjective eyes. It's relighting. It's doing all of these really, to Noah's point, very complex things. Whereas if everything's all in the same world, but you're just sort of tweaking some stuff in the background, a lot of that heavy lifting is certainly taken care of because of the methodology followed to get there.
Yeah.
I would imagine that if they did need to redo something in the background, as long as you had a fairly close something that you filmed on the LED wall, when you come back to try to do that rotoing out everything, it'd be much easier to, if it's already the right colors back there, instead of trying to get that fade and all that. Never done rotoing, and I don't know that I want to try.
I did so much rotoing, dude. Like, that is why, when I became a director, if I hear anyone say, "Oh, don't worry about moving that rig, we'll roto it," I'm like, no, because I'm that guy in the basement at MPC back in 2008 rotoing frigging grass. Okay, so, but no, I mean, look, and also you got to think about it. Like, if you're rotoing something on an LED wall, you got light bleed that's going to come through, right, on the edges and stuff. I mean, it's hard enough getting a good key, but to get all the light bleed. So if you're going to replace the background completely because somehow creatively in editorial decide to change the background, it's going to be a lot of work. But if you're augmenting stuff, like maybe painting out a sign or something you're doing, just augmentation, then that's okay. Your roto is just there to help mask, to help the masking process, but you're not need to get like 100% articulation, I think.
Did you have to do like 3D tracking of that scene? Because I was wondering about that. I haven't had to track something, like 3D track something in from a volume, because I could imagine that would be a little difficult to actually get like a real 3D world track on.
Yeah, we end up
was through on, like, I could imagine that being challenging to comp something into your volume, like into the depth of your volume.
No, that's extremely tricky. We use PF Track to try and get a solve. We also obviously we had the VFX supervisor take 3D data, which helped. And there's also some level of metadata you can get as well that kind of helps with the lens and stuff. But at the end of the day, we just went into Resolve and did a 2D track. It was as simple as that. And the thing about Resolve, it's extremely powerful. You could, back in the day to do skin, to change the skin tone and stuff, you had to do a key and that kind of thing. And now they got like facial analysis, the way it just maps, it picks out the skin, even if you're wearing glasses and stuff. It's mind boggling. So before you go and try and do an expensive 3D solve, just look at what the editorial can do, specifically things like Resolve, the grade, because there's a lot you can do in there.
Yeah, again, talking about technological leaps over time, I'm so relieved that 3D didn't really take off as much as it could, to the point where it was ubiquitous, because this stuff would be like trying to do what, like, the LED wall simply wouldn't work in 3D, because it really is a 2D magical trick in front of the camera that if you could see the depth, you'd instantly realize, oh, that backdrop doesn't go off to infinity. It's actually only 10 feet away from the subject. That looks super weird. So, just to has this point that when you're getting into a 2D fixed world, you kind of get away with murder on a lot of this stuff, because it's like, if you can get it so that it kind of looks right in 2D, then the eye will just do the rest and just like, oh yeah, that looks correct, and take it from there. So, and I personally feel like this wave of LED wall stuff will not go the way of 3D, just because it's a lot simpler to work with, and it kind of has so much more application. 3D movies, I really think Avatar was really the only 3D movie that we ever needed. And everything else that came after was just kind of like, it's 3D because why not? But that just seemed like a dead end, and this feels like something that has a lot more upside.
For sure.
Yeah. So Unreal is the kind of the program that gets most of the accolades, the attention for all this virtual production stuff. Are there other solutions out there? Is there add-ons that people are using? Like, what's the field looking like for solutions?
You have Unity, you know, like people forget, like, you know, there's Unity, and, you know, like amazing filmmakers like Neil Blomkamp's Oat Studios did some like amazing work before the whole Unreal Engine revolution like went full blown. You know, it's like with everything, it's the right tool for for whatever task you're using, right? You know, and I'm sure there's going to be other little tool sets or add-ons that that will plug into either Unity or Unreal. But I think the reason why Unreal is so popular is because there's so much content in terms of educational content that you can get. There's so much assets you can get from the marketplace. You know, I think the big thing is, which Epic would probably figure out is, when you make a game in Unreal Engine, obviously you pay royalties if you made like $1 million or something, right? And this a minute, if you made $1 million in a game, you're in a good place to pay royalties. But there isn't anything like that yet for like for movies that are being made, and no doubt they're thinking about that. But a lot of the reason why people pick tools sometimes is like, how does it fit within their production? We're going into subscription model now. Most tools are available subscription. No one buys an Adobe license or an Autodesk Maya license. You buy a subscription. And I think a lot of the decisions you make on your tools is really dependent on your key talent. Like when I was in visual effects, I would only hire Nuke compositors because the studio that I was supervising at only had Nuke seats. Although I had an amazing Fusion comper who was so good, but I couldn't hire that person. So a lot of that is down to like popularity, and it seems like Unreal seems to be winning that because there's just so much, there's things like the Epic Mega Grant, which encourages people to like make the transition and so on.
Yeah, and just to piggyback on what Hess says about that, Unreal itself and Unity to an extent as well, they're kind of unique as a visual effects tool in that they don't have to pay for themselves with visual effects. They have this little thing called Fortnite, which brings them in bazillions and bazillions and bazillions of dollars that allows them to then essentially offer it for free to filmmakers, which is very cool because just about any other visual effects tool like your Nuke, your Maya, etc., they need to make a living as just visual effects tools. So they need to charge you for a subscription. They need to and it needs to be an expensive subscription that makes it harder to get into if you're not already working. So knowing that there's that massive resource of development that fuels that tool that has absolutely nothing to do with filmmaking, to me is kind of intriguing and refreshing, because it just, we're kind of, filmmakers are so used to basically having to push the envelope themselves. And in this one case, we're kind of just being dragged along for this ride because the tool happens to work so well, but we don't have to be the ones driving. So it's kind of nice.
Unreal is such a customizable tool. I mean, you can download the entire source code and do whatever you want. Game developers do that all the time. So I would imagine that there'll be some very deep, customized Unreal engines at some point. So question I asked the group yesterday, the motion capture group, you can answer within any NDAs that you may or may not have. What are some things coming in the future that you're really looking forward to?
Okay, I'll go first because I'm on a roll here. Probably AI-based machine code, machine learning tools, like for example, like motion capture. Yeah, and there's quite a few of this already now where, you put a bunch of GoPros, 6 or cameras and something, and it'll film the footage, and then it would use machine-based learning to analyze each frame and create a skeleton. It's still a little bit early. It's not 100% perfect, but I think, this is going to open so many doors because just like LED walls did, where, actors don't have to leave their town to shoot something, or you can't shoot a specific location. The same thing's going to be with motion capture. We're already in a stage now with inertia suits where you don't need to go into a Vicon motion capture stage. Now obviously there's debate about, how much quality the fidelity of the motion capture is, but the point is you can just get an Xsens inertia suit or Rococo and just do it. Right. And I think the next thing in the future is like, you basically shoot your actor wherever they are, treat it like live action, except feed that through the machine-based learning algorithm, and it will generate the skeleton. And, there's a version of that already, right, Brian, for rotoscoping, right? They're using machine learning for roto.
Yep.
So,
Yeah, it's like I'm excited for for AI tools as well. For workflows that are just super labor intensive, right? And something that you really wish a human didn't have to do. You know what I mean? But they're super finicky. The models they take a totally different approach to get there. And what we found is the challenge is taking some AI tool sets, but also wanting to be able to get human intervention at the end product before it's baked, because a lot of that AI is just, it's baked, it's done, it's the way it is, and if you don't like it, you've got to retrain it, right? So and that's an unpredictable output at times. That training is like, okay, let's train it and see what happens, and then keep updating the training. So trying to find that bridge between the AI and the normal tool set that we all know, like because we do some work with an AI group in developing some tool sets, and there's this concept of ground truth, right? And my point is, the ground truth is whatever the director approves in DI and says it's final, right? Like that at the end of the day. So until you get there, nothing is ground truth, and you need all the flexibility you can get until you get to that point, or else you're going to paint yourself into a corner. So like, I get so excited when I see all the 2-minute papers, and it's like, oh my God, all this stuff is so amazing. And I do think that it's going to get there. I think that I don't quite know how it's going to fit into our pipelines, but it will for sure. And that's going to be very exciting to see that it's never going to just be all of a sudden, we have no work to do. It's going to be a gradual sort of progression. I think you'll see tool sets, coming into Nuke and other kind of applications like that really leverage certain key things that you're like, okay, if you can get us 90% of the way and then give us the let a human take it the last 10%. That is what humans are really good at, right? Is dialing stuff in and then being able to iterate it going forward to get it final. So that I'm really excited for that. We're also excited for volumetric. We've been doing some volumetric crowds, and that's pretty cool too, because you start with someone's real cloth, their real hair, their real action, they're acting. And if you can get that into a world and relight it, however you'd like, and be able to place them wherever you want and really not have to worry too much about it, you can get some really high quality photoreal people without having to go to like an articulate CG humanoid. So that's I think going to be the next sort of tool set that's coming to bear as well. So I'm excited to see that flesh out a little bit more.
Yeah, I mean, both those areas are super intriguing to me as well, and I feel like if there's one thing that I'm interested in on top of all that, is the idea of kind of what we call computational cinematography, where you can see this in the most recent iPhone, where they're able to take essentially a LiDAR scan and combine it with the kind of optical capture of the camera to be able to develop a real-time depth map, which is cool, because then what they can do is they can literally in post-production decide where the focus is going to be. Whereas like any conventional camera, the focus is set at the time you shoot. And once you know the depth, in addition to the cinematography itself, then composites become far easier, because you can just set exactly, where in depth in the shot you want to do your shot. I mean, essentially green screens could go away entirely, and any shot could be a comp, because if you're always shooting depth information, and anytime you want, you can just set a comp. So I think that those kinds of AI kind of computational, machine learning tools, the more they get into, higher end cinema cameras, the possibilities are going to be really endless with what you can do. Now, there's no reason why you couldn't literally do away with an LED wall and have the compositing engine itself live in the camera, and you just load up a scene into your camera, and wherever you point the camera, you're shooting whatever scene you want. I mean, that is absolutely a possibility. So just seeing where these things go when the kind of the Aries, the Reds, the major camera manufacturers get their heads around what they can do, the possibilities are really endless. So that's cool.
It's kind of like live comp. I remember like 10 years ago being on the set, and we had I forgot what the system was called, but like it was hooked up to a PC, and I remember seeing a live action green screen, and then like the person switched it to the CG background, and I'm like, oh my God. And obviously it's like this, but what you're talking about is full 3D spatial depth. But it's gradual. You know,
Mhm.
filmmakers want more and more. You know, ambitions are getting bigger and bigger, and it's growing with the tech, and the tech is now having to like catch up. But yeah, I think there's just so much stuff to look forward to. But at the end of the day, we still have to remember the grassroots of filmmaking and storytelling. You know, it is down to a good friggin' script, right? No amount of tech it's gonna fix a bad script. And sometimes, you know, even I get overwhelmed by tech. And oh my god, we could do this on LED walls, we could do volume captures, do all that. And then you have to think back, like, what is the heart of what we're doing as a filmmaker? We're telling a good story, and you know, and all this other stuff is to help support tell that story. I think we've got to keep reminding ourselves that we get so overwhelmed with the awesome tech out there.
All right, we are at our hour. So Houston, if you want to jump back in here, we could probably keep
Houston.
going for a couple more hours. But
Yeah.
Up to, dude.
Thank you, guys. Yeah, so
Gonna-
this we will have to do another one of these, I think, with a little bit more time. I think this topic in particular, the cross with this new tech, virtual production, and I think eventually, like early on at the very beginning, it will just become part of the regular production. I don't think it will be such a separate thing anymore. It'll just be like how they use green screens and things, and or blue even in the back. It'll just be another tool in the whole filmmaking process. But man, yeah, we could go on, and I appreciate you guys taking the time already out of the day to be here for us, and thank you so much. But we are going to wrap it up. We're going to say goodbye. Is there anything else you guys would like to shout out or make sure people know about or check before we go?
I'm good.
No? All right, cool. Well, then I'll say thank you to the audience as well for joining us. It's been a fantastic ride all through this whole week, and I think we'll do something like this again in the future. We have one more show later this afternoon, 1 p.m. Pacific, where it'll just be me and our president, John Bach, talking about the state of the computer hardware industry as a whole. And so stay tuned for that. And just one last time, thank you, Brian, Noah, Haz, Kelly. Thank you guys so much for being here today. Really appreciate it. Yeah, thank you so much. And we'll see you all next time.
Bye.
Bye.